Good evening, all. I could see around some 28 participants from our RC-24. And similarly, with my institution here, I have set of participants in the conference hall seated. And in the online mode, we are they are viewing the lecture from here, from the seminar hall. And it's a great privilege for me to introduce Dr. Anandini Dar. Especially RC-24, that is focusing on the childhood and youth. I was trying to connect with Anandini there, ma'am, to have a lecture connecting to the childhood or youth. And together, she was prepared to give me a lecture, especially on the topic of participatory and co-design approaches for migrant girls' well-being, a study in an urban informal settlement of Delhi. And I'm really happy to present this one as one of the special online seminar session from RC-24, which is focusing on sociology of childhood and youth. To introduce Anandini Dar, who is Associate Professor, School of Liberal Studies from Munjal University. When it comes to her education, she has her honors BA from English Literature and then from University of Delhi, and post graduation from La Trobe University, Melbourne, Australia, along with a postgraduate diploma in gender sexuality and diversity studies from La Trobe University, Melbourne, Australia. Her doctorate was in childhood studies from Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, USA, in 2014. And she has a continuous experience from 2008 to 2023 as a researcher in Rutgers, a graduate assistant in Rutgers, going for becoming a researcher in Care India, an adjunct professor and assistant professor in B.R. Ambedkar University. And her key publications are focusing on decolonizing children's suffrage engagements with B.R. Ambedkar's ideas on democracy, and then also placing a report on a placemaking through co-design approaches, a case study of Jai Hind Camp Delhi, Center for Publishing, Dr. Ambedkar University, Delhi Press. And also she had her publications about the political democracies of youth, performative politics, South Asian children's identities, and political agency. And her professional distincts, if at all we come across, it is all about, it's more on the being editorial board member of Children's Geographies journal, Taylor and Francis, serious editor, studies in childhood and youth from Palgrave Macmillan. So, and she has also got a lot of awards, recognitions from different professional societies, and it is a great privilege to have you here on this occasion. We are having a 5-day research methodology workshop, and today is a third day, and we have all the participants who are participating in research methodology workshop along with us. And also we have the RC-24 RC-24 research committee members, as well as other RC members who are eagerly waiting towards your session, ma'am. And thanks for accepting our invitation. It's a great honor for us, ma'am. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Vijayalakshmi, for such a detailed introduction, and for caring to mention all my previous work and accomplishments. It's a real honor for me to be part of ISS, and BML Munjal is also the upcoming host for the AISC 2024, and I'm really looking forward to meeting many of you in person later in December. So having this opportunity to interact with some of you RC members is quite exciting. Given my own interest in sociology of childhood and youth, that has existed since my MA days, I would say, and has continued and has led to lots of other work in building networks as well, such as the Critical Childhoods and Youth Studies Collective. Vijayalakshmi was kind enough to bring me on board into this methodology workshop. And I must apologize that there was some lag at the beginning of the session, and I hope things will go smoothly here on. It was given the context of the workshop, I thought it might be productive to look at a recent publication of mine in which I work along with an architect who was also at Ambedkar University, Delhi, previously, where I was working a year ago. And as part of a larger project where we were looking at displaced populations in Delhi, um, we were also imagining ways in which we can design better cities in particular. And along with students of a program in the School of Design, we decided to not do interventions. Oftentimes architects and social scientists are at conflict with each other, right? Sociologists will try and unpack social problems. We try and understand the challenges that bring that constitute certain concepts. How do they come to being? Particularly in sociology of childhood and youth, we're trying to unpack the categories of childhood and youth. How do they come to be constituted? In what context do they emerge? What are the challenges that affect children's lives? Designers are often trying to, architects are trying to, find solutions to these problems. And for us to work together was a very new way in which to imagine sociology also, was then to enter together at a point of methodology. And it was important as a sociologist and an anthropologist to share with the social architect students and designers certain methodologies that can be used in communities that are challenged, in communities that are marginalized, and how do we begin to, before arriving at solutions to problems, which is what the goal of the architects often is, particularly in terms of designing social, solutions, not just product solutions. How do we arrive at understanding a problem? How do we arrive at understanding issues? So, the way in which we came together was to work on participatory and co design approaches in the community in which we were working. Now, this is a settlement in Delhi called Jehin Camp, and I'll give you a little bit of detail of the location in a little while. But I'm just trying to set the context that even the fact that, given the title of this paper, that we were working with migrant girls in particular and looking at issues of their well-being emerged from ground up. It emerged from engaging with certain methodological practices in the community that then resulted in us understanding what are the challenges that plague children vis-a-vis our larger questions of placemaking, of public space and public places, and who use these public places. So, in trying to understand these larger questions, we were able to arrive at the issues of migrant girls and their well being, which was particularly related to the issue of public spaces and playgrounds. And we used participatory and co design approaches. And what I'll do for this session is, and Vijayalakshmi, please let me know when to stop. I will primarily be going over in the of going over this paper, which some of you can perhaps read at a later stage. It's not in a traditional sociology web journal, rather a journal on well-being, space, and society. And we can I can stop if there is too much, if I'm going over time, because I know we are also starting late. Um, and then we can take up other more in-depth questions about methodology perhaps later. But I just wanted to share that today I'll be going over this particular publication of mine. The context in which the study emerged was in the context of migration. We know that increasingly cities across the world are experiencing unprecedented scales of migration, and they host large number of displaced populations. In India, in particular, there is a high rate of internal rural to urban migration, which is accompanied by displacement, with approximately 139 million people moving from rural to urban centers, according to the Census of India in 2011. While these groups are constituting the majority of the working class of these cities, there are many challenges that affect their everyday lives, including access to some of the most basic services like water, electricity, sanitation facilities, and most pertinently, but often not studied quite drastic intensively, is the access to public and adequate living spaces. Right, migrants who arrive in cities like Delhi either for seasonal work or long-term employment often live in very densely packed urban informal settlements. Women and children often struggle to find spaces to conduct their daily activities, even such as bathing, toilet use, leave alone any space for leisure or play. And this tends to impact their overall well-being. Access to public spaces in cities is often marred by other forms of exclusions and discriminations. There is a lot of scholarship that looks at challenges faced by adult men and women in terms of migration, induced displacement, and living in such informal settlements, but very little scholarship that looks at children's and particularly girls' needs for um, open spaces and public spaces. Oftentimes, top-down city planning processes also are very skewed towards, large-scale development projects. And being one of the marginalized groups, young girls tend to get affected the most by this phenomenon, given particularly related to the issues of safety and security. So, what this paper posits is the need to actively actually engage with this marginalized group of children, which is young girls, and by using participatory and co design methods in the planning and designing of child friendly places and cities. We look at this case of Jai Hind Camp, as I was telling you earlier, which is set in this larger project that we were conducting. And just to give a bit of context before I give you more about the site, why are we, I mean, these are some images of the camp within the site itself that highlights what I was saying, the lack of spaces for girls in the open areas of settlements. But why are we centering children and their needs in urban planning? Is important to sort of position before I go forward. There's several scholarship in fields like childhood studies, sociology of childhood, that actually now look at the role of children and young people as agentic, capable beings who can contribute to participatory research and even to urban planning processes. Urban planners and scholars, primarily in the global north, have also conducted projects on understanding how young people use and experience their environment, or how do they contribute to neighborhood design, and offer distinct ways to think about inclusive urban planning processes. There is also another body of literature that it looks at including children in neighborhood planning and design, because this would enhance socially just public spaces, right? It would create more inclusive, it would create a more inclusive and just society, social life. It would also advance community well being. Um, Also, along with these, there have been various initiatives by, organizations, international bodies such as the UNICEF, who have adapted what was called the Child Friendly Cities Framework. This became extremely popular in the 1996 90s, and this framework was particularly pushing forward a focus on enabling children to participate in remaking and reimagining public spaces and cities. In India, in particular, the Bernard Van Leer Foundation has collaborated with, for instance, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs to initiate projects on child friendly smart cities. This has been implemented in Odisha and Udaipur. Then there's an Urban 95 initiative that promotes well being of young children through their participation in projects that happen in cities. So it becomes very important to plan child led critical design interventions for their own well being, as they constitute a very large number of population for our cities and yet remain structurally disadvantaged. And to set in context, why and how am I looking at this idea of well-being? Um, so children are, there are various ways in which well-being has now been defined, and in context of um, both living environments, and also in terms of growth and development personally. And some of the literature that, looks at well-being in particular in context of children talks about the need to reduce risk and vulnerability for children, and this has been primarily framed as a rights-based model to imagine children's well-being, wherein you think about protecting the risks and vulnerabilities of young people that will then advance their well-being. um, Scholars such as Ben Aries have actually talked about how there's a need to go beyond this rights based framework to also look at the relationship between rights, freedoms, and development. And this we find is particularly useful in understanding young people's well being. Um, uh, in addition, there's been several scholarship that also talks about the concept of well-being that goes beyond just access to material resources alone. J. Alistair McGregor, for instance, talks about well-being model where there is an emphasis on the material well-being, relational well-being, and subjective well-being of people, which will put together will be considered how to understand people's overall well-being. So material will be what people can have. Relational is oftentimes what can I own or what can I possess in relation to what someone else has. And subjective well-being will be from a very personal, reflective perspective. That also enhances well-being for people. Now these frameworks, when we look at it in context of children, Ben Aries has discussed how children's own subjective experiences related to their living conditions and the material and cultural social environments, such as, for instance, the ability to realize and exercise their agency, can improve their well-being. Scholars working with children in context of poverty have also talked about how participatory approaches can be engaging, experience-led, and can help access local concepts of well-being, which other indicator-driven kind of research on well-being does not provide. So when we were setting up our social design project and framing, how students and who were part of our study as well would understand or try and work with children and other people in the communities to understand their well-being, we adopted this model of participatory approaches in an attempt to access experience-led local concepts of their material and social environments in which they were living. And this is partly why this approach of participatory and co-design methods became essential to understand children's own concept of well-being. So just to, before we go into what were some of these participatory methods that we employed and how were they helpful in ascertaining children's own experiences and perspectives that then further contributed to their sense of freedom, their sense of agency, and ability to make change that then connects to their well-being. I'll just briefly go over the location of our website and where we conducted this study. So, Jai Hind Camp is an urban informal settlement that is located in the southwest region of New Delhi. In the early days of its emergence, it had about 1,200 households, which comprised mostly migrant workers and their families from the state of West Bengal, Assam, Bihar, and UP, Uttar Pradesh, who had migrated in search of better livelihood opportunities. At the time we conducted our research, there were about 2,000 households, because in 2014, the Delhi Urban Shelter Improvement Board, the DUSIB, recognized the settlement as one of the Jhuggi Jhopri clusters, which is an official terminology adopted by the state for such settlements. So DUSIB, what it does is expected to provide provisions for housing for homeless people, and they help to upgrade existing urban slums. So it also needs to offer, DUSIB has to offer resettlement to those living in informal settlements. So they move them to semi-permanent homes where there can be provisions for basic electric and water services. However, the Jai Hind camp residents have not yet been provided any such resettlement, nor any access to basic running water supply and electricity, despite being on the list of the TUSIP board's resettlement colony areas. Now, Jehan Camp is densely packed, low-rise settlement with small alleyways connecting it to neighboring middle-class housing. You can see in the image there's this sort of amidst these green spaces and background of high-rise, there is a informal settlement. With minimal open space, the central ground, the space next to the community, there's a community toilet block that is built by an NGO. And the space in front of the school, there's an NGO run Shrishti school. These spaces act as resource sites for multiple activities throughout the day. The residential tenements in this settlement consist of one large room with no attached bathroom or kitchen. Most of the homes are semi permanent structures built with temporary materials. So, residents have made their own arrangements for electricity by finding connection with a temple and a mosque in the community itself, in the settlement itself. This is, of course, a much more costly arrangement. Water is supplied daily through private tankers and distributed amongst the residents through daily roster system. And families have to sort of, literally carry these around. In terms of educational spaces within the site, there are three NGOs, Srishti, Asha Kikaran, and Vision India. They run primarily tuition classes and support classes, school support classes for students. And most of the children tend to attend the local municipal school, but many of them actually do not go to any school also and oftentimes spend most of their hours in the settlement. Um, and if you look at the paper, you'll find we have some maps also that provide a spatial visual of what these built forms look like. Now, when we were going ahead to conduct our research, what we did was uh, primarily think of this as a, since it was a collaborative project, we imagined a few there were two, three groups of students who helped participate in this project. So students' entry into the sites happened after we visited the community, informed them about our research, informed them, took permission from them of conducting our research with them, and we had recorded the permission as well from the community members, and encourage students to also seek verbal consent and permission anytime they were interviewing or talking to somebody. So we began with conducting a socio-spatial mapping of the village, which included mapping our major movement corridors. Since we were interested in these public spaces and use of public spaces in these settlements, we were trying to see what were the movement corridors or the significant public spaces that form the everyday experiential realm for this community. Mapping of these selected community spaces was initiated to understand the socio-spatial interrelations that exist within the site. And these were then documented by using mapping techniques such as cognitive mapping, stakeholder mapping, spatial mapping, resource mapping, and a needs and assessment mapping. After this, we also tried to identify the mobility and access to various public spaces within the settlements. And it was a kind of a multi-layered mapping that was done through built use and activity patterns. So we had a researcher who mapped out at what time there was what kind of movement in the settlement, and what areas were getting utilized more than others. And this helped, some of this movement mapping, mobility mapping, what it helped was to identify that adolescent girls are the least mobile in the settlement and can be considered as one of the most marginalized groups living there, their mobility and their use of public spaces. So after this initial mapping, we identified 20 girls in the age group of about 9 to 16, um, who were willing to participate in our study. And these 20 students were identified through a snowball sampling technique. And we conducted a small sort of participatory approach to ascertain and understand their needs for the public spaces. And this included us conducting observational walks with them. So we would track or walk with these girls where what would be their daily routes in the public in the slum. And this also helped us build certain rapport with the girls, which then led to us conducting semi-structured interviews and focus group discussions with these adolescent girls. So through some of the demographic mapping, we were able to identify age, time of migration, the languages they speak, the educational status. We were also able to then get to know their daily routine and life within the settlement. We identified issues related to, lack of infrastructure and facilities, and the general day-to-day challenges they are facing while navigating through the settlement. Particularly, the issue that came up was with respect to their safety. We also conducted so the interviews that we were trying to do, we also had two group discussions where we conducted a drawing exercise with these 20 girls to understand their needs. And in that, we were trying to get at what do they like and dislike about the settlement, how do they view their settlement, and third, what changes would they like to see within the settlement. So these three questions kind of guided what we arrived at. Now, in terms of what we were then able to discuss with the girls, the mapping exercise, of course, led to unfolding the ways in which space gets used. What is the issue with accessibility? Girls are largely seen in the spaces in front of the toilet block. So this is right at the entry of the slum. There is a big toilet block that has been built by an NGO, and primarily girls are present in that area because we know that there are no toilets within the homes. There is no sanitation and water there. So we noted that the spaces where women and even teenage boys find space to socialize and hang out was this space, was the space ahead of the toilet block. And the girls either commute primarily to and from their schools or to and from the toilet block. And this happens mostly in the early hours of the morning and afternoon hours. And other times of the day, the girls are performing daily chores like cooking for the household because their mothers are also daily wage workers or domestic workers in other homes. So the girls end up doing the household chores right outside their house, the home spaces. Um, so what we saw that was in the open public areas, that space was utilized primarily by men and even younger boys, but girls were invisible there. Um, in the in-depth interviews, what we found was that what we call Khulke Khelo as a part of a project that some smaller group of students of ours were able to conduct was to develop an understanding of their everyday challenges, dreams, and aspirations vis-a-vis public spaces. I'll just move to the next slide, I think. Okay. No, I don't think it's visible to you. Right. Okay. So when we interviewed the girls, what we saw was were things that they articulated was similar to what we were also able to observe in the socio-spatial mapping. They articulated the presence of men in their community open spaces, as a result of which their parents would tell them to stay inside the homes. And those who did step outside to attend school or do other chores were either accompanied, oftentimes, by an elder, or they would walk together with a group of friends. Their movement was also regulated, and they were expected to return back from school without stopping anywhere for play or leisure, for fear of their safety from the gaze of loitering men. The girls also shared that they barely managed to go out and play within the settlement. And if they did step out to play with their friends, it was mostly in the area right outside their jugis, right outside their homes. So one of the girls, a 12-year-old who did not go to school, for instance, she shared that men occupy most of the space in the settlement, and hence my brother does not let me go outside to play. So there's this fear or concern of safety. So this restriction within that space, uh, within the space right outside their home, is what they're allowed to do. Girls also reported challenges in terms of playing sports in narrow alleyways. So if they are restricted to this small area, they shared that when they do, for instance, another participant, she shared that when they do try and play badminton right outside their house, the shuttle gets stuck in the electric wires. So, this challenge of not having access to an adequate space for play limits also their opportunity to gather outside their immediate home areas for recreation or to play other different types of games. While the adjoining middle class neighborhoods and residential household blocks adjacent to the slum have public and neighborhood parks, these girls are also unable to travel alone to these spaces. And if they do go there with their mothers, for instance, on some occasion, they are discriminated against, and the guards are asked to ask them to leave. So, one young girl, for instance, said that when we go to play in the park in the nearby apartment complex, along with our mother, the guard does not allow us to play there. Now, this is not surprising as we see that um, more and more gated communities do not allow are highly class stratified, and even those who are working there may be very well living in the communities from where the girls come from, but they're asked to govern their presence in these public parks. This kind of exclusion of girls, even from public parks for play, is very pervasive, and limits their exposure and interaction with their peers, and often results in feelings of hopelessness and despair among them. So, a young 13-year-old girl, one of the, who was going to school, shared that earlier when I came to this slum area, to this basti, I would like to play. But now I do not like to do anything, because more and more she shared that when she would step out, she would be either harassed by or would see the peering presence of these men and feel uncomfortable. So she'd rather just retreat back in her house, which was not the case in uh, her hometown where she came from, where there's more access to open public spaces outside their homes. These interactions and discussions with the girls reveal that they have limited access to public spaces with hardly any places for play within the settlement. To further substantiate this understanding, their overall needs were also visually represented by some of the girls who raised concerns related to what was bothering them every day. So we asked them, what are some of the main concerns or issues that you would like to be addressed in your neighborhood, and all of them, all 20 of them said that they wanted a playing space, an area to play in their settlement. Others did talk about how they want, connection of water in their homes. They would also want, a bathroom, a washroom attached near their home rather than have to go, even though they would occupy, they were the primary users of the toilet block. Those who were living at the end of the settlement often found it very difficult to walk all the way because this is a 2,000 household settlement. It's a very large settlement, and the toilet block has only about 25 units, and it's also at the front of the settlement. So what that does is it also creates hindrance in walking all the way to this toilet block, and they'd rather have them attached to their homes as well. And 11 of them also pointed out that uh, hygiene and waste management should be better taken care of. Um, so out of so this need for safe and accessible play spaces was identified by them, and important for the students to make sense of their sense of well-being and overall development. As part of this co-design process, some of the girls also shared then when we asked them to draw, just not draw, to tell us what would their ideal playground be. They discussed how they wanted different play equipment. One girl shares that there is no play equipment in her, she's not able to acquire or access play material, and her parents are not able to support this as well. So a big challenge was having, even if there was a playground, the playground should be furnished with perhaps a basketball net, and should be accessible, should be close by to their homes as well. And we asked them to also draw what would their ideal playground look like, because it appeared that this is something very critical for their own well-being. A lot of their images, as you can see as well, were inspired by what popularly would, we learn how to draw these images of playgrounds. And so they were very similar kinds of depictions. So there should be a swing, a slide. So there should be certain kinds of play equipment present. But some conversations with them, in discussing what they drew in the drawing workshop, also revealed that they want benches, they want greenery, they want some flowers, where they could use, which they could use as a backdrop to take selfies. So they're like any other children who want to take photographs of themselves these days. um, they want some drinking water facility within the playground, um, because it would be, they would get thirsty while playing. They also were concerned about waste management, so they identified dustbins in the playground as being essential. They wanted a shed for rain and weather protection. So even if it's raining, they wanted the ability to be able to be in the playground, and adequate lighting. Another very interesting idea that emerged from the discussions was to have a small shop that would cater to the children's play material requirements. So if you want to buy a ball, or if you want to buy my racket breaks, I want to continue playing, so I should have access to these kinds of play materials. And these distinct ideas for playgrounds that address their own material and subjective needs indicates the significance of involving children as co-designers in planning and designing their own child-friendly playgrounds and spaces. So when children participated in designing their spaces, and when they expressed their agencies, it can contribute to their well-being. Based on these above insights, a park layout was also finalized collectively with the selected participants, and their parents opined and also shared their ideas were also solicited on this. After some deliberations, the students of social design along with us were able to imagine a space outside of the NGO school Srishti as a site for this, making a child-friendly play area. And it was committed to, producing a safe space that children could access, and particularly girls could utilize. The front yard of the school, on one side, there are three rooms there, um, blocks. Let me show the image. Sorry. Um, yeah. So it's a three classroom blocks and one office room, in which classes are held for children, and they themselves decided on the different designs they want to be present in this area. Now, it could not be a full-fledged playground because there was very limited space in this outside of this block. So the girls voted that they would actually like to have certain kind of more colorful and designs that are appealing to them, that should be present in the school block, because it's not very appealing or exciting to hang around. So based on some inputs we got from the girls and based on drawings, this intervention to paint and reimagine what this school area would look like was made. So you see in this, on the ground, they decided they would put the hopscotch numbers, so they could play this game anytime the classes are over or they're hanging around, and they felt like this was their own space because it looked a certain way. Now, outdoor, just to sort of I know that we are coming close to our time, so let me self edit. Um, Outdoor play has been studied quite significantly as informing children's overall development and by extension, extending their well being. Um, by extension, their well being. So, when children play outdoors, they feel part of the larger community, they engage with their urban environment. It also has multiple benefits vis a vis their psychological benefits, enhancing physical skills. And several scholars of play and child development have already highlighted how it enhances creativity, feelings of emotional and social growth. And in fact, playing in open public spaces also enhances their possibility for exploration, experimentation, adaptation, communication, and socialization. It also gives, and as we saw when we were working with the girls, a sense of freedom and agency to determine the kind of play experiences they would like to have. These aspects are closely linked to concepts of well being and highlight the significance of play spaces in fostering peer interaction and overall development of children. And after we had built this, painted this area, made some of these games on the floor, we found that this space was used far more by children and girls. And just being able to more, for us, it wasn't about seeing an, from my perspective, it wasn't so much about seeing how an intervention will then lead to certain outcome or output, but the process of being able to arrive at the needs of the girls within the community vis-a-vis play and open in the public spaces, and how we arrived at it was far more significant to understand and situate the needs of these marginalized groups forward. Um, so I'll, just pause here and leave the rest for discussion, and keep it open for any questions that you may have.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. Actually, that was a wonderful qualitative paper. It is an eye-opening for all our research scholars who are here, how to bring in a qualitative paper, qualitative content into a paper. And especially with respect to the population, that is the from the informal settlings on the adolescent girls. So sensitive population, and especially the qualitative content with the sensitive population, how they are able to convert it as a paper. That was a nice presentation pertaining to it. Thank you, ma'am. Yes, now the floor is for discussion. We have the RC members as well as workshop participants. You can feel free to have your questions or clarifications or any verification, or you can have the suggestions from Anandi ma'am also, who has a great insights and experience on the child and youth related projects. participants from my session. Do you have any question? Yes, Francis. Yes, ma'am. We have a question, ma'am. Hope it is audible to you. Yeah. Can you use the mic?
Yeah. Uh, Ma'am, good evening, ma'am. My name is Francis and I'm a research scholar here at BIT Chennai. So I have a question regarding, would like to ask you to share your experience about the challenges you faced while collecting data, interacting with the community people, because it's very sensitive and the population is big, and it's like uh, entering into new space and collecting the data. It's a bit challenging. So, what kind of challenges you faced?
Um, so thank you, Francis, for asking this question. I think it's important as um, those who conduct research with young people and marginalized populations, that too of an empirical nature, to reflect on challenges, ethics, because those often do not get discussed as much, and they essentially are the main kinds of day-to-day struggles that go into making a paper possible, making data collection possible. So the first thing that I'll share is that this larger study, it started in 2019. So the first time we met with the community, we were introduced to the local pradhan, so the local leaders. So in such a large settlement, there are often some self-elected leaders, and this community actually had two. One was a woman and one was a male. And the woman was very active in terms of, um, you know, um, trying to get things done within the community, making spaces, ensuring that services are brought to the community, such as the toilet blocks. And she was quite on the forefront of these issues. Now, in 2019, when we first met them and gave this permission, we were able to do a large chunk of the research with them along with our students. Now, the second challenge was then of how do we bring in not just ourselves as researchers and our team as researchers, but how do we also bring in students and sensitize them to the community and make sure that they are sensitive in collecting data, they are ethical in terms of collecting their data within such a large community area. So what we did was to make sure that we do not get trapped in sort of the space. We divided the community into blocks in terms of access. And since we were working with students as researchers and training them as well, we brought a bunch of students to specific spaces. So we assigned certain spaces to some students, and we what we did was a lot of stakeholder mapping and spending a lot of time on the field along with the students. That was a big challenge because students did not want to spend too much time in the field. They came in with the mindset of wanting to just go ask interviews, and just design whatever output they wanted to design. They also came from a architect interest in architecture. So training architect students to be ethical sociologists or social scientists was also very challenging. So that was our second challenge of how do we bring in students into the field and sensitively train them to collect data in this settlement. It worked because we were able to do some off-site interactions with them as well as on site. And there would be moments where students just wouldn't show up because they thought that just going in one day talking to someone, that was enough. So hand holding them, making sure they are visiting, keeping in contact with their respondents. So ultimately, this study that we did was possible only with about 3 students. and who were consistent. And we tried to, the challenge was to then remove some students from the space to make sure we are, conducting research in a rigorous, critical, and ethical manner. So the challenge was to then how do you put some students away and retain some for the data collection process. Um, the second challenge, not so much for this study because we were able to do most of the work in this stretch of 6 months, but it came up afterwards because the COVID pandemic hit us. And what that did was the later follow up work that we wanted to do, we were able to do because we couldn't return to the field site. There was a restriction, there was a lockdown restriction. And this created a different kind of challenge in terms of our connectivity with the community. So some of us were also involved in the care, in the work for providing rations in the community. So that was one of the ways in which we stayed in contact, but it affected the study as there was a huge gap, and then we had to modify some of what we were trying to do in our research study in the first place. So these kinds of practical challenges, which I'm sure some of your research scholars who are maybe were in the middle of their PhDs must have also faced, because you end up losing contact with your research site, and you're not able to interact with your interlocutors. So that was a big issue. But then we returned again. But most of this study was then concluded. This part of the study was concluded, and we made do with what we had. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I have another question. You interacted with the children, more participatory.
Sorry, is someone asking me a question?
Yeah, the question is once again another question from Francis.
Okay.
Yeah, a little bit louder, Francis.
So my question is like you collected data from the children, and the data is all about how they vision the community. So what kind of facility they need, the playing ground, and in that ground, what are all the things they needed. So it's the part of their basic need and basic infrastructure they wanted. So we collected those inputs. My main question is, are those things has been implemented? Like any other steps has been taken to implement or like put those vision into action?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my
Yeah. Thanks, Francis. So this is where I think the collaborative part of so as a sociologist, I don't end up doing much of this implementation or intervention work. For me and for the study, it was more important to unpack and unravel the connections between um, methodology and ways of understanding children's well-being. And for my architect friend, um, it was about helping students also learn the processes of social sciences in being able to arrive at interventions. And as sociologists, you'll hear us always say that it's more important to understand and unpack the problem rather than jump into implementation, um, finding a solution. And that's what we did. So even what you see as our social design intervention, it wasn't an entire playground block that was created. There were other challenges that came up with it. One, of course, like I said, there was a desire, there was some in our research project to do this as well, and for the architects on the team to carry it forward. But one, the pandemic affected us, and we could not go ahead with, putting something into place. Second, what was the learning perhaps for the architects was that they decided to, of course, model certain other playground ideas that the children had created and use a space outside the near the toilet block area for this playground. But what ended up happening, and they actually installed some used tires as a barricade and to create a playground space. Then they had some bamboo sticks that they had brought in to create some kinds of swings. um, but what ended up happening was the community uh, took those materials away for their own purposes. So overnight, those items that were being used to construct this playground were disappeared because they could sell it and earn money out of it instead. So that's the problem with the implementation in some ways, both logistical and sort of the issue of that there are other needs that dominate children's needs, and of course poverty is a strong one for the community and the parents to address.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. I hope that these are all some of the challenges of social scientists whenever we get into the field. Ms. Chandini Basu, she has raised the hand. I hope she has a question. Chandini, ma'am?
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
yes.
Okay, great. So, firstly, I would like to thank the RC for opening up this session for everyone. So, as a RC member, we could join. So, thank you very much. So, I'm Dr. Chandni Basu, connecting from the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies and Research, Sister Nivedita University, Kolkata. And it's great to hear Anandini. She was with us recently online for a lecture in a short course on parenting in childhood. So, as always, it was very good to hear your lecture. And last year, I published a paper on child friendly cities. So, if you would like to take a look at that, and it would be great to have your feedback then. Right. So, I am very curious to hear about your experience of working with architects because we are at the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies, we are interested in interdisciplinarity. So, and this is a workshop going on research methodology. So, if you could reflect a bit on that. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks, Chandni. It's always a pleasure to meet you and hear your questions. And thanks for sharing about your paper. I might have missed it, but I'm really looking forward to reading it as soon as we finish this call, or at least downloading it. Um, so this was very this was an experience that I've had for the first time of going beyond my discipline as an academic and working. I have, of course, previously worked in the children's rights sector. So I've worked as a practitioner, worked with practitioners, activists. But working with architects, one thing that was very distinct about this project was that the architects involved, I would share, were already quite sensitive and already quite trained in social approaches to architecture. So for instance, my colleague who was part of this team, she comes from a school called social design. So, design these days and architecture these days, at least one stream of it is quite progressive in the ways in which they are thinking about bottom up approaches to placemaking versus top down approaches to placemaking. So, urban planners, for instance, will still continue to have very top down approaches to placemaking, to thinking about how to develop and design cities, to design spaces, um, particularly since we're talking about public spaces, right? And what urban planners are doing is, making these master plans of Delhi without considering what the locals who are living in those areas truly require, right? So, for instance, in Delhi, when there were these houses and spaces being remade, these were these government houses near Ames in Kidwai Nagar. They were being brought down and brought up from scratch. Now, the idea was that this is a space that planners have already decided this should be for government houses, people who are working in government sector. Now, the problem that others, designers or architects who are working from this bottom-up approach, they are highlighted was that given this area is centrally located for aims, one of the biggest challenges for that space is that residents, doctors, students who come to AIMS, or even those who come for treatment to AIMS, they tend to not have space to stay around that area and have to travel from long distance. So, would it not be more ideal to use that kind of space for that would funnel people to AIMS rather than just these government houses of people who work somewhere far away. So this is the difference, I would say, between urban planners who are designing cities versus the architects or social designers with whom I was fortunate enough to work with on this project. So I would say that my experience of working with architects who have certain social design background, who think about placemaking from bottom up approaches, was quite productive. The one thing I thought was quite different though was that they knew some of our sociological methodologies and social science methodologies, but they had reframed and renamed them into something else. So that was a little bit of a challenge in terms of terminology. So what we would just simply call ethnography, they called participatory action and learning method, for instance. So that kind of methodological conflict came up. So learning language across disciplines was a challenge. So it took time in terms of spending time discussing, sharing knowledge that then helped iron out some of these issues. But overall, it was quite a learning experience for me as well to see how some of what we do can be implemented, because oftentimes we face this, and what Francis was asking, students tend to ask us, so what is the practical outcome of this? Fine, we know the problem, but in today's world we're also looking for solutions, and so that's the biggest leap that perhaps social scientists and sociologists need to make in some ways, especially when it comes to populations such as the young. This tends to come up even more.
Thank
So
you, Anandini. Thank you for the response.
I hope you get to work with some well-meaning architects as well sometime.
Yes, we have been talking about that with our Department of Architecture.
Nice.
Yeah. See you soon.
Yeah, sure. See you.
Yeah, yeah.
Participants, do we have any other questions?
Hello, ma'am. Can I ask one question? Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Uh,
Please.
Thank you, ma'am, for such an enriching lecture. It was gripping throughout. I'm doing an independent research in a semi-urban space right now, because I'm working in a degree college there. So my work basically is related to an informal sector, especially the traditional handicraft work. My issue is, and I just want to ask something which is related to my methodology that I'm dealing with right now, because it's a semi-urban space, and the work that is being done is clustered and dispersed in a number of locations throughout the city. So my issue is, how do I come up with a demographic analysis and the profile of the people in that kind of a situation? Because I cannot take a small community and do that, because for instance there would be 15 to 20 households in one clustered location, and then another 15 to 20 households that work in the traditional home setting. So my work basically is on the home workers of the traditional craft. But the challenge and the chasm that I have right now is how to inculcate both quantitative and qualitative study together, because doing an in-depth interview with the home workers is very easy. I would say it's still smoother, but asking them questions through a survey is difficult, because sometimes they do not want to reveal their wages in numbers. And it's always when you interact with them, then you understand the dynamics and the whole layers of how even wages are formulated. Sometimes they are not in a position to reveal, and sometimes it's not possible also to reveal, because there are multiple dimensions that also cater to it. So one question that I have is, in case of a study that is dispersed, how do we do the demographic study in that case? Secondly, is it always important to do the demographic study along with the qualitative study? Because sometimes I feel that doing that demographic study is not very much helping, as far as the research is concerned.
Thanks, Pragya, and very interesting study that you're embarking. I will start from your second point. It's important to ask, how important is it for your study to have this demographic analysis, and to what extent, right? Um, are you interested in numbers? Are you interested in mapping the profile that will then help you contextualize the qualitative, more in depth information that you're ascertaining from them? So, to what extent, I think it's what I usually say about methods is that we have to first go back to our research questions to understand what method is most essential and important for us. So, if your research question needs to be addressed, can it be addressed through your qualitative work? Or does that also need to be addressed through some of these surveys and quantitative analysis? Or demographic profile. So demographic profile can also be very quick and simple. Um, so you can get some of the most basic information material from them, or perhaps if you identify some kind of a elder in the group, or a leader, or someone who knows the community more, they can also be informers for your demographic profiling, depending on to what extent you're trying to get information. And that quantitative studies would be far more than just a demographic profiling, right? Quantitative studies tend to draw on large scale data sets that may already be available in open access or public domains. But it seems like I don't know the exact nature of your research questions, but that your qualitative material will be more essential for you. And perhaps you can rethink, if the survey is becoming a difficult kind of method through which to detail information, then is there another way to get at it, right? Is there some other person through which you can get at this information? But I will also say this, sometimes, we get disheartened because of the everyday challenges of collecting data. Don't let that be the determinant for going ahead with that method or not. Um, if it's important for you to collect that information, it may be time consuming. You will still have to do it. It can be challenging, but it means that you still need to do it. So it's about going back, revisiting, and trying to ask yourself, how important is this for my study? What kind of research question will it help address and answer? And then go from there. So I hope that's a little helpful to you.
Yeah, ma'am, definitely. I'm actually looking at the lived experiences of the home workers. In the traditional craft, the craft is Zardozi. The issue, I mean, the demographic study, I'm going about with it because it is. I feel that it is not helping me much as far as my work is concerned, but sometimes it is important to profile the data. There are two things in the mind. Qualitative study, definitely in-depth interview is very, very essential because I'm looking at the poverty dynamics as well. How do they understand what kind of a precarious life they have? um but I'll go ahead with what you have suggested. I'll rethink about it. Thank you so much.
All the best.
Yeah, then it was a great session, Dr. Anandini there. It was first time we are able to meet each other online. Actually, we have been talking in WhatsApp for a long period of time, planning for this session. But from RC-24, that is on the childhood and youth, I sincerely thank you for accepting this invitation. And soon we are going to meet in our conference in your institution. And I know that you have planned for also an institute for childhood studies soon in your institution, and you're working on that. I'm really happy because we are in real need of such special centers exclusively for such studies. And there is also going to be a spread of word to other institutions that they can also have a same kind of thinking and an objective to think about either a center, or at least there should be yearly some seminar sessions and workshops concentrating on it in the beginning that can actually come out for a requirement of a session sooner or the later in their own institution. So that was a great session, and the paper which you worked on has really made an eye-opening for many of our participants. The chat also says that people have written their words in the chat. Thank you. Thank you for sparing your time. And soon, yes, we are going to meet, and our academic relationship is going to continue. And all the RC members, RC-24, who has joined here as a convener of RC from VIT Chennai, I really thank you all for joining here. We have nearly, we have got around 26 papers this time for our RC, and we are scheduling it, the sessions paper with respect to the sessions, with respect to the themes. I'm going to discuss with Anandini. They're also in the scheduling of sessions we are planning to. So we'll have a panel discussion on the day 1 or 2, which we are also planning for. So we will be meeting and we'll have more deliberations, academic discussions, and other healthy discussions, forthcoming discussions in our conference in December. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Dr. Anandini.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to meeting you. Bye.
Thank you all participants.